Hey everybody, and welcome back. I know a lot of you out there learning languages probably have this same question, and today we're diving into it.
Oh, yeah.
Is memorizing new words enough, or do we actually have to understand them to really become fluent?
Ah, yes, the age-old debate.
Right. So to get to the bottom of this, we've got some really cool research and expert opinions to share today.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about how our brains store new words and what strategies work best for actually remembering them long term.
Exactly. So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
What exactly is the difference between memorizing a word and actually comprehending it?
That's a great question. It's kind of I think of it like having a formula for something,
Okay,
but not really knowing when to use it.
I see what you mean.
Like you might be able to recite the formula perfectly, but if you don't understand what it means or when it applies, it's not really going to help you solve any real-world problems.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
So how does this apply to language learning?
Well, think about it. You can memorize a list of vocabulary words, but if you don't understand how to use them in sentences or in actual conversations,
Right.
then they're not really that useful to you. You're not really speaking the language. You're just kind of like parroting back words.
Right. It's like that classic example of a tourist who can only say where is the bathroom?
Exactly. So how does our brain go from just knowing a word to actually being able to use it?
Yeah.
Well, there's actually a whole science behind memorization.
Okay.
It's not just about repeating something over and over again. There are actually four distinct stages that our brains go through.
Okay. Tell me more about these stages.
All right, so the first stage is encoding, and this is where your brain basically takes a mental snapshot of the word.
Okay, like a mental picture.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Then you've got consolidation, which is like deciding which snapshots are worth keeping.
Oh, so like filtering out the important information.
Exactly. Then there's storage, which is basically filing those snapshots away in your memory. And finally, retrieval, which is like pulling that snapshot back out when you need it.
Yeah. So is that why sometimes we forget things we just studied?
Yes, exactly. And there's the scientific term for that. It's called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve.
Wow. I've never heard of that. What is that exactly?
So basically, this curve shows that we forget information really quickly if we don't actively engage with it.
So if we just cram for a test and then don't think about the material again, we're more likely to forget it.
Exactly. It's like imagine you have a bucket with holes in it
Okay.
and you keep pouring water into it. Some of the water will stay in the bucket, but a lot of it's going to leak out through the holes.
So our brains are like leaky buckets.
Kind of.
Yeah.
But luckily, there are ways to plug those holes.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. So to really retain those words and make them stick, we need to understand them and how they're used. We need to make those connections in our brains.
So how does understanding a word actually help us remember it better?
Well, think of it like this. When we memorize a word in isolation,
Okay.
that's an isolated thread. It's easy to lose track of. But when we comprehend a word, we're connecting it to its meaning, its usage, even our own personal experiences.
So it becomes like a web of interconnected information.
Exactly. And that makes it a lot harder to forget.
That makes sense.
Oh.
So it's not just about knowing the word,
Yeah.
but understanding its context and how it fits into the bigger picture.
Precisely. And this process of creating meaning is called semantic encoding.
Semantic encoding.
Yeah. So instead of just storing the word in isolation, your brain is linking it to a whole network of related concepts and experiences.
So it's like filing information away in a filing cabinet instead of just throwing everything into one big drawer.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. And that makes it a lot easier to retrieve the information later on.
So how can we apply this to language learning?
Well, I think a great example is personal experience.
Uh-huh.
I tried memorizing vocabulary lists from a textbook and they just wouldn't stick.
I've been there.
But it wasn't until I started watching movies and listening to music in the language that I was learning that I really started to understand how those words were used in real-life situations.
So it's about experiencing the language in action rather than just studying it in a vacuum.
Exactly. And there are lots of great language learning approaches out there that focus on this idea of immersion.
Like what?
Well, for example, there's Lang Magic.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
They use real-life dialogues and interactive exercises to help you learn the language in a more natural and engaging way.
So it's not just about memorizing lists of words, but actually using them in context.
Exactly. And that's what helps you really internalize the language and make it your own.
So it seems like the key takeaway here is that simply memorizing words isn't enough. We need to understand them and how they're used, in order to truly learn the language.
Absolutely. It's about making those connections in our brains and creating a rich tapestry of knowledge.
So how can we move beyond simple memorization and start truly learning words?
Well, there are a lot of great active learning strategies that we can use.
Okay, tell me more about those.
One really effective technique is called spaced repetition.
Spaced repetition. That sounds interesting.
It is. It's based on the idea that our brains are wired to forget things over time.
Yeah, that's definitely true for me.
But by strategically timing our review sessions just before we're about to forget something,
Okay.
we can actually interrupt that forgetting process and strengthen the memory trace.
So it's like giving our brains a little reminder before they completely forget something.
Exactly. And it's a really effective way to make information stick long term.
So instead of cramming everything at once, we should space out our learning over time.
Exactly. And there's another really powerful technique called sentence mining.
Sentence mining, I've never heard of that.
It's a really cool technique where instead of just memorizing isolated words,
Okay.
you memorize entire sentences.
Oh, wow. So you're learning the words in context.
Exactly. So let's say you come across a sentence, the vibrant cityscape pulsed with energy.
Okay.
Instead of just memorizing the word vibrant,
Right.
you would memorize the whole sentence. The vibrant cityscape pulsed with energy. And this allows you to absorb the grammar, the nuances of the word's usage, and even the emotional context.
So it's like a crash course in grammar and vocabulary all rolled into one.
Exactly. And it's a really effective way to internalize the language and make it your own.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to have to try that out.
I think you'll really like it. It's a game changer for language learning.
This has been super insightful. I'm already starting to rethink my whole approach to language learning.
That's great to hear, and we're just getting started.
I can't wait to hear more.
Me too. Let's dive back in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're not just learning the word in isolation, you're learning how it fits into the bigger picture of the language.
Oh, I like that. So it's like learning a word and all its friends at the same time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another really interesting point.
Okay, that's that.
Technology is starting to play a huge role in helping us move from memorization to understanding.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, one of the most exciting things is the rise of AI-powered adaptive learning platforms.
AI and language learning? That's so cool.
It is. These platforms are like having a personalized language tutor. They can track your progress and tailor the learning experience to your individual needs.
Whoa. So it's like it knows what I need to work on.
Yeah. It's amazing. Like, let's say you keep getting a particular grammar point wrong.
Okay.
The platform will recognize that and give you more practice exercises on that specific point.
So it's like it's adapting to my weaknesses.
Exactly. And it can also adjust the difficulty level and frequency of vocabulary exposure.
So it's like it's always challenging me just the right amount.
Precisely. It's designed to optimize your cognitive load.
Cognitive load. What's that?
It basically means the amount of information your brain can process at one time.
Okay.
So these platforms make sure you're not overwhelmed with too much information,
Right.
but you're also not getting bored with material that's too easy.
So it's striking that perfect balance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this personalized approach is so much more effective than traditional methods like just working through a textbook.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, everyone learns at a different pace and has different strengths and weaknesses.
Right. And these platforms are taking that into account and creating a truly personalized learning journey.
So it's like the future of language learning.
I think so. And it's only going to get more sophisticated as technology continues to evolve.
That's exciting. So we've talked a lot about the science behind memorization and understanding.
We have.
But let's bring it back to our listeners.
Yeah.
What are some practical takeaways they could use in their own language learning?
That's a great question. One thing I would say is to focus on active learning.
Go on.
Don't just passively absorb information.
Right.
Really engage with it. Ask questions, experiment with different techniques.
So it's about being an active participant in the learning process.
Exactly. And another important tip is to personalize your learning.
Okay. How do we do that?
Well, instead of just working through generic vocabulary lists, try to find words and phrases that are relevant to your own interests and goals.
So like if I'm learning Spanish because I want to travel to South America,
Yeah.
I should focus on vocabulary related to travel and culture.
Exactly. And you can even create your own flashcards or use apps that let you input your own words and phrases.
That's a good idea. And what about immersion?
Immersion is key. Try to surround yourself with the language as much as possible.
Okay, like how?
Watch movies, listen to music, read books, even talk to native speakers if you can.
So it's about making the language a part of your daily life.
Exactly. The more you expose yourself to the language, the more natural it will become.
This is all great
Yeah.
advice. I feel like I'm already starting to see language learning in a whole new light.
That's fantastic. And remember, language learning should be fun.
Yeah, it shouldn't feel like a chore.
Exactly. So find what works for you and enjoy the process.
I think we've covered a lot of ground here today.
Uh-huh.
Any final thoughts you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to experiment.
Okay.
There are so many different approaches and techniques out there. So try different things, see what clicks for you, and don't be
Well,
afraid to think outside the box.
that's great advice. And I think the most important thing is to just keep learning and growing.
Absolutely. Language learning is a lifelong journey.
It is. And it's a journey that's full of surprises and rewards.
I completely agree. So keep exploring, keep learning, and most importantly, have fun.
That's great advice. And I think that's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
So to all our listeners out there, keep those language brains firing, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive. I love that. It's all about finding what works for you and making language learning a part of your life. Before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I'd love to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, shoot.
What's one question that our listeners should be asking themselves as they continue on their language learning journey?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think the most important question to ask yourself is why?
Why?
Yeah. Why are you learning this language?
That's so simple but so powerful.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day of like memorizing vocab and doing grammar exercises.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember why you started this journey in the first place.
It's like remembering your purpose.
Exactly. When you have a clear sense of why you're learning a language,
Yeah.
it makes the whole process so much more meaningful.
And motivating, too.
Absolutely. If you know why you're doing something, you're more likely to stick with it even when it gets tough.
It's like having a North Star guiding you.
I love that analogy. And you know there's no right or wrong answer to this question.
Right.
Your why could be anything. Maybe
Yeah.
you want to connect with your family heritage
Yeah.
or travel the world and experience new cultures.
Or even just challenge yourself and learn something new.
Exactly. The important thing is to find what resonates with you.
So to all our listeners out there,
Yeah.
take a moment to reflect on your own. Why? Why are you learning this language?
What are your goals?
Yeah. What are your dreams?
Let those answers guide you on your language learning adventure.
I love that. It's all about connecting with your personal motivation.
And remember, language learning is a journey,
It is.
not a destination.
So be patient with yourself.
Yeah.
Enjoy the process.
And celebrate your progress along the way.
Couldn't said it better myself. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Oh.
It's been such a pleasure exploring this topic with you.
Likewise.
And a huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope you found this episode insightful and inspiring.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the fascinating world of language.
Happy learning, everyone!